Welcome to Pop Screen, the Geek Show podcast dedicated to the good, the bad, and the preposterous of movies either by, starring, or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm Graham Williamson. I'm a film critic for thegeekshow.co.uk and horrified.com. And this week I've been joined by...
Ben Pilmer, a training and consultancy business manager in healthcare.
Normally, we like to give our listeners some sense of where they can read other criticism or work by our guests. But if you want to experience Ben's work, listeners, get sick. Now, there are some rock legends whose lives never make it to screen because of a lack of interesting or entertaining incidents that happen to them. Then there's Elton John, a man who, at his coked out worst, famously called his manager to complain that the wind outside his hotel room was too loud, and could he do anything about that? Yet a film of this astonishing, ridiculous life was not made until 2019, when an unlikely combination of the writer of Billy Elliot, the star of Kingsman, and Spike from Press Gang struck jukebox musical gold in our film of the week, Rocketman. Now, Ben, you'd seen this before, hadn't you?
Yeah, I'd seen it. I didn't go to the cinema to watch it. I think I missed it at the time. Do you know when you mean to go and watch it, and then all of a sudden, at the moment you think you're going to, it's no longer there. So I actually ended up watching it on the TV in my front living room.
I'm never going to be like that again. As soon as the cinemas reopen, the idea of like missing something on the big screen is so horrifying to me right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't realize what you've got until it's gone, do you?
Yeah. Well, I did see it on the big screen, and I watched it again to refresh my memory for this. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that 2019 date when it came out, that was about half a year or so after Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yes, yeah, which I actually did go to the big screen and watch. Yeah, it was interesting timing, wasn't it? I think, and to have two great icons of that decade or of the decades, to have a film out at the same time was a delight for me, but really interesting to see the contrast between the two as well.
Yeah, because there is, I mean, even beyond the general areas that you would expect would be the same, like 70s rock, both got LGBT themes, the obvious stuff.
Yeah.
There's some weird areas of overlap. I mean, I never thought there would be a time in which there would be two separate films out with the 1970s rock manager John Reed as a supporting character. This isn't exactly the Marvel Cinematic Universe we're talking about here. No one expected a franchise of this.
Yeah, like somebody just turned around one day and was like, who would be really good as John Reed?
Yes, that's very weird. He's played by Aidan Gillen in Bohemian Rhapsody, and he's played by Richard Madden of TV's Everything in Rocketman.
Yeah, and really I say really well portrayed. I mean, through the eyes of the creators and Elton John, it should be said. But really good character. I think some real depth to the character. And it's a good villain, if you like.
Yeah, it's a thankless part in a lot of ways, but I do think he carries it off pretty well.
Yeah.
But the other connection between the two, of course, is that, I mean, God knows when we'll ever get an authoritative account of what was happening behind the scenes at Bohemian Rhapsody. It was, as they say, a troubled production. But one thing that seems pretty certain is that for the last 2 weeks of the shoot, Dexter Fletcher stepped on board as director.
Yes. Yeah. That really odd, wasn't it? Really odd to be hearing about things like that. It's not how you'd expect a production to go. Well, certainly not how you'd expect a production to go, but to change something so last minute, and also at such a big position as well. Just very odd.
Yeah, and obviously there's been all sorts of sort of disquieting things come out about Singer since then, and it seems like he's the one director in Hollywood who's never spent a day on set, as far as I can like make out.
It's a unique style. It's a unique style to do things.
He really pioneered the Zoom method of working that we're all.
He's thriving now. He's absolutely thriving in this situation. He's got 1,000,001 movies ongoing, and that aren't suffering because of it either.
So I remember there was kind of a narrative at the time, particularly among people who were disappointed by Bohemian Rhapsody, that Rocketman is kind of the full strength version. Rocketman is what you would have had if everyone was working together and Fletcher had been allowed to impose his vision on it from the start, I guess.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, isn't it, to start thinking about the influences that must go on from the artists themselves. You know, the influence that Elton John. You know, when you're watching it and you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, what parts did Elton John say? Yeah, I really like that creative direction that you're going in. Not so much there, and how much you want to write history. If you like, and how you are portrayed, and it's the same for Bohemian Rhapsody. I suppose if it gets to a point where your creative vision for the film starts to conflict with the artist's ideas as how they want to be portrayed and how they want Freddie to be portrayed, because obviously in this instance Freddie wasn't there to do that. It's just a really interesting dynamic, isn't it, between the film and the artists, because it's around for a long time. It's a something that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there is a school of thought that with music biopics you should just print the legend, you know, show what people want to see regardless of that. And this has a bit of license to do this, because the thing that fascinated and surprised me the most when I first saw it is that this is a full-on musical. Like you can say that Bohemian Rhapsody is, I guess, kind of a musical because there are people on stage and they're singing, but this is an actual people burst into song and there are rows of dancers musical.
Yeah, I mean, from the first scene as well, isn't it? You know, that kind of, you know, he bursts into the room. He probably has a little bit of dialogue for maybe a couple of minutes, and then straight into, you know, the bitch is back. I think it was.
Back,
straight into that, and like you say, you've got dancers on the streets, you've got a little boy singing, and straight away, I think it sets the tone for what you got about to watch for the next 2 hours.
And what I think is brilliant about this, other than, you know, the obvious thing, there aren't many musicals made, and it's quite a sort of rare treat to see this kind of big production number on the big screen. But you've also got two kind of subgenres here that can very easily go wrong, and I think putting them together neutralizes the problems. A rock biopic can very easily go wrong. You know, there are lots of bad rock biopics. And also this is, I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase, I don't know how popular it is, but this is a jukebox musical.
No, I'm not actually. What's meant by that?
The idea of a jukebox musical is that obviously a traditional musical has like show tunes that are either written specially for the project, or in the case of Singing in the Rain, were like tunes that the studio had the rights to, that someone wrote a narrative around. A jukebox musical is something more along the lines of Mamma Mia, where you have pre-existing songs that people know and they are put together in a plot, which, you know, normally this is, you know, there's a parallel universe where someone is sweating away working on an Elton John jukebox musical, thinking, how do I get a band called Benny and the Jets into this thing? How does this
I can imagine, actually, they probably sat there and was like, right, okay, we've managed to get 15 songs in, we've got another 5 to shoehorn into here. Well, there's a good point there. Yeah, let's just start singing about Benny and the Jets. That sounds
Which
about
one of
right.
our characters can we call Daniel?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they all have this in, except Rocketman, which, because it's a biopic, can just cut to scenes of him playing Pinball Wizard or Benny and the Jets or
Mm,
any other
mm.
song that has lyrics you can't easily fit in to a narrative of his life. But I mean, the other thing is that because it's a musical and not just a rock biopic, you don't have any of those awful scenes where, like, again, in another version of this, which is a straight up rock biopic, you'd have a scene where he's sat in his basement during the 3-day week looking at a candle and it flickers a bit and thinks, there's a song in that, isn't there? But you don't have to have this because in
Yeah,
musicals, when people get inspiration, they just jump up and sing.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it so beautifully nullifies the cheesy bits, the crap bits of both of the genres that it's in, I
Mm,
think.
mm. Yeah, I would agree. I'd agree with that. Yeah, creating plenty of opportunity for you to put some of the iconic songs that, like you say, wouldn't naturally fit into the storyline as a whole.
Mm. We should probably, I feel like we could do a whole power ranking of the musical numbers in here, but I don't think we should get that into the weeds. What were the particular favourites for you? Which ones did you think worked really well?
What from the perspective of part of the storyline as
Well, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, obviously, you have your favourites in terms of, oh, I'm glad to have heard that
songs?
song.
Yes. Yeah.
But which do you think they did something particularly imaginative or interesting or emotionally successful with?
Yeah, I think it's the I think it was Crocodile Rock. I think probably the scene where he goes to the troubadour,
Yeah,
and he's really nervous, and there's that lack of confidence, which I think is a theme throughout the entire film. But you see that, and then when you almost see him take a deep breath and become someone else, and I particularly liked where he starts to sing, and I think he starts to sing a cappella.
mm,
Um, and you almost get the feeling as though, oh, he's going to be really nervous for
he's going to
this.
bottle it. Yeah,
Yeah, he's going to bottle it. But then all of a sudden, the first bit, he's just done nice and slow and controlled, and then immediately gets into Crocodile Rock, which, as a song, is really upbeat and uplifting. And I think actually of all the scenes in the film, that in particular is just one that you look at, and you're really behind him. You're really happy that
mm.
he's managed to nail that.
Yeah, and I think some of the songs that's a good example of it. Some of the songs are reshaped in ways that
Yeah.
make them fit what a musical needs from a number at this point. Like the most obvious one being the treatment of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Yes, yeah. The Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. That's when Bernie's walking out of the restaurant, isn't it?
It's in
Um,
that, and it's also they use it as a kind of a motif throughout, which again
ah,
I don't think is the kind of thing that just anyone would do in their jukebox musical. A lot of jukebox musicals are just here's a hit, here's another hit, here's
yeah,
another. But there's an attempt to make this flow as an actual musical should.
yeah. Satisfy the masses. Let's
Mm,
get this hit in, and yeah,
yeah.
I see what you're saying there. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, there's a few songs, a few numbers that really impressed me. I think just in terms of pure choreography, the one for Honky Cat is
Yes.
incredible. And it has, but I mean, we're going to talk a bit about the cast later on, but in terms of just like one scene appearances, the waiter who just flips over the table is what a
Yeah.
star that guy is. I
This is
love
this
him.
is in my way. This
Yeah.
this needs to move immediately. Yeah, that's a fantastic scene. I actually, when you just mentioned that, then I totally forgot about it. But yeah, what a fantastic scene that they kind of just go into it. And what I really like about those little moments, because there's a couple, isn't there? The bitch is back. I think is the first one where there's almost a transition in
Mm,
between one time to another, and
yeah.
it's. it was really interesting in times of that. That song in particular, at the start of it, I think he's just met John Reed, hasn't he? And then he goes into that honky cat, and by the end of it, as a viewer, I'm immediately invested in their in their relationship in the space of one song, and that's partly down to the great choreography, as you say there, but also it's a spectacle, isn't it? It's a spectacle for the eyes. Great song, spectacle for the eyes, and by the end of it, you're like, you're invested in their relationship in all a part of part of 5 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's one of a few numbers on it that's a bit of a, I don't want to say deep cut, because Honky Chateau was a really big album, but I think if you were asking someone on the street to list down 10 or 12 songs that are going to be in the Elton John movie, Honky Cat would not necessarily be in there. It's there because it works.
Yeah, it's a really good point again. If someone said to me, list your top 10 songs, Honky Cat might not be in there, but it really did work in that moment with that choreography for the reasons of the script and the film as a whole. Absolutely, I think there wouldn't have been a better song for it.
Yeah, and I think picking up on something you said about it, that idea that you can use a musical number to kind of propel the plot forward and establish something in a way that's emotional is something that people don't often get about musicals. I hear a lot of people say, I hate musicals because, every time the plot's going, it just comes to a standstill for 5 minutes while they sing. And you think, well, that's how it is in a bad musical, but...
Bad musical is, a little bit of talking, a little bit of script. Oh, we've got to a point where we're gonna, like, as you said earlier, we're gonna shoehorn this great hit in. Everyone's gonna enjoy the great hit for 3 minutes, and then we're gonna go back to the boring scripting until we get to the next hit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like that for this, was it? It was,
No.
it felt they didn't feel two separate things. They felt intertwined throughout.
And I think in terms of like something that pushes it forward, as you were saying, the Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting scene is a fabulous example of that, because Elton John grows up about 10 years during the course of it.
Yeah, and again, because of the upbeat nature of the song, you don't actually question anything. You think, oh yeah, young Elton John. I assume he was maybe 11, 12 years old at the beginning of that scene. The song comes in, fantastic, and then it's a spectacle again, isn't it? It's choreographed. It's got loads of people in there, and by the end of it, you have no question. You don't have a second thought at the fact that he has grown up about 5 or 6 years in that time, or maybe more.
Yeah, he's grown up and he's become Taron Egerton, which feels like a good way to maybe go into the cast, because this has a pretty interesting cast. I think it can't have been easy to find people for these roles, I would say.
No, and am I right in thinking that Elton John had a particular say in who portrayed him?
Yeah.
I think
They went through a few people. There was a stage which I'd forgotten about until I was doing the research for this, and it sort of came back suddenly. There was definitely a stage where they were talking about Tom Hardy, which would have been absolutely surreal.
I'm just trying to think that through, because immediately
you lived your life like a candle in the wind.
I was just about to say, as soon as I think Tom Hardy, I think acting with his eyebrows. So how he'd have been able to, well, he's a great actor, don't get me wrong. It would be a million miles away from anything he's ever done before. I can't see. Was that serious? Was that as well? Like, had they really thought it through, or was it just a fleeting thought?
I mean, had they thought it through is a question that I feel only the production team could answer, but there was definitely a time when he was attached to it.
And I mean, if you're Elton John, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I'll have Tom Hardy play.
Yeah, you just sat there thinking, oh yeah, I did look a lot like Tom Hardy in my youth. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean, I think Elton will say the same. Will probably be the first to say. I'm going to put it out there, but he would have said, yeah, I probably wasn't the greatest looking
Yeah.
man. And then, Tom Hardy is a very beautiful looking man, and you're thinking, there's a little bit there.
But Taron Egerton isn't a bad-looking guy, but
That's a
there is
very good point
something
as well.
about his face that you can change that into Elton John in a way that I didn't think would be possible. You put the glasses and the wig on him, and somehow that works.
Yeah. The likeness is uncanny, isn't it? Yeah, it's I think he does a great job from start to finish, and again, I think the script helps that. I think the way that the production is put together helps that, but you really get the sense again from the I keep going back to that first scene because I really do feel as though it sets the tone for the rest of the film, and just when he bursts into those doors and he the way he talks, the kind of sassy nature of the script at that point, and you immediately think, I believe in you as Elton John, and I can believe that.
I think it was easy for me because I'm probably the only sort of film goer in Britain who had only seen Taron Egerton in I think only in one thing before this, actually. Ironically, one thing with Tom Hardy, he has a small role in Legend as I forget which Cray twin was gay, largely because I don't care about 60s gangsters, but he's in there somewhere as R. Cray, let's say, R. Cray's boyfriend. But I hadn't seen the Kingsman films. I hadn't seen Eddie the Eagle. I hadn't seen a lot of the things that people would know him from.
I had seen the Kingsman, which I thought he was very good in, and then I saw, was it Robin Hood?
Oh, blimey, yeah.
Oh, honestly, yeah, that was that. When he probably has some interviews later on in life, it'll go down as kind of like it'll go down as Will Smith's Wild Wild West. I think
because that was done in that, like you say, Wild Wild West, that kind of willfully anachronistic style where someone fires a bow and arrow and it lands and there's a massive fireball, and you think, how much kerosene was there in the Middle Ages just lying around the place?
Yeah, it wasn't a good film. It really wasn't a good film. One of those films that goes, right, I've got a great title and I've got a couple of great cast members, and everyone loves a good Robin Hood film.
Yeah.
Let's go with it and let him, shoot some arrows, save somebody.
It's one of those public domain titles, isn't it, which sort of gets reinvented every couple of years, despite the fact that it never makes money. I am convinced that there is some sort of producer's style tax break in Hollywood for any studio that loses $100 million making a version of Peter Pan. It's the only explanation for why they keep doing it.
I think you might be onto something. I think you could dedicate an entire show to that.
An investigative podcast.
Yeah, right. We want to get to the bottom of why this dross keeps coming out of Hollywood, and I have a theory.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I can see why someone would watch Kingsman and think, oh yeah, that guy, Robin Hood, yeah, that works. But there is something else in his persona that I think is more interesting that this film mines. I mean, he is very self-deprecating. Seems very down to earth. And I think you sort of need that for someone like Elton John, because of course there is a risk that as soon as he starts going out on stage dressed as Queen Elizabeth I, you think, right, no, he's gone bananas. I give in. I don't connect with this character anymore.
Yeah, I think that it's the vulnerability and the way he gets the vulnerability across throughout the film that you can't help but like him, and him, and also Elton John, who is portraying, and as an actor to be able to get. I think when you mention Kingsman, and
Yeah.
Robin Hood. I think it's because as an actor, you probably, I assume, it's easier to portray an action man, you know, with a range, with a scope of emotions that's maybe quite narrow. Because it's more action based. There's probably a love interest in there, and then you're done. Whereas this really, I suppose, challenged his skills as an actor to widen the scope of emotion in which he needed to portray, and the vulnerability, the up and down nature of Elton's mental health. So many different things that he had to do, and I think he did really well.
Yeah, because despite a lot of people think that musicals are very fluffy, and they're wrong. A lot of people think that pop movies are necessarily fluffy, and they're wrong with that. But it still, I think, might surprise people how warts and all the image of Elton John you get in this movie is, because Elton himself is very upfront about the fact that there were large stretches of his life where he was just not a good person to be around.
Yeah, and that honesty as well. It takes a lot for a man to be that honest, a man or woman, to be that honest. And in this case with Elton John, to be able to kind of openly say, I was this, I was that, and then also oversee a film in which, again, for large chunks of it, he is portrayed as somebody not very easy to be around. That must be a very difficult thing to do. It's one thing, I suppose, saying it and maybe saying it in your autobiography, but then to see somebody else acting how you say that you acted in that time.
Yeah, that's very true. I wonder if that's like the reason why Elton was pretty hands off in a lot of ways when this was being made. He was sort of a guardian angel of the film. He protected it against, studio notes coming in saying we need to tone down the drug use, we need to tone down the homosexuality. He protected it against all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But he said he really didn't want the filmmakers and the actors to feel like they had him breathing down their neck, trying to impose a particular vision on it.
Yeah, well, fair play to him in that regard, and good that he championed those things, because without it wouldn't be the same film, would it? If you hadn't toned down the homosexuality, or the drug use, or the the relationships that he had with different people, it just wouldn't be the same film.
There is reportedly a version of this film that was released in Russia which does cut out the homosexuality and the drug use, and I would love to see that. It would just be a beautiful 26 minutes of a guy sat at a piano.
We're going back to the musicals, aren't we? A little bit of talking. Oh, that's a great song. Great song. Yes. A bit of talking again.
And there you go. That's all it is.
What a great film.
Yeah, it's true. And I don't want to keep bringing up Bohemian Rhapsody, but they were compared so much. I thought, Bohemian Rhapsody was not as sanitized as I'd feared when I'd heard the Queen biopic is a 12 certificate. But Elton John did have a wonderful line about that, where he said there was a lot of pressure for it to be a PG certificate. And I kept saying I did not have a PG certificate life.
Yeah. I mean, everything that you hear about rock and roll in that decade tells you that if you're going to do a film of somebody from that decade, it's definitely not going to be PG. And if it is PG, then serious questions need to be asked.
Yeah. And the thing about the 70s as well is that it's kind of almost a naive time to have that happen. There are drugs going around, but nobody's quite aware of what the long-term effects will be. There's, sex around, but there's no AIDS yet. It's like a perfect historical moment for that kind of excess to happen, and well, it did.
Yeah, I mean the drug, and they do the. I feel as though they show the drug use in, for want of a better word, classy way, and the reason I use that word is because it doesn't dominate the viewing experience.
Yeah.
You're aware that it's there. You're aware the impact that it's having on Elton John and on the main character, but you don't feel as though it's in your face. You have to see this. It was more the effect of drug use as opposed to the actual drug use itself.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose one of the most sort of visually discreet but emotionally powerful depictions of that effect is the title song itself, the sequence which uses Rocketman.
Yes. Yeah. That's the scene when he's in his bedroom and then he goes out to the pool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of the tranquility as he's falling through the water to see himself as a young boy playing the piano. I think there's and what an interesting use of probably one of his top 3 songs, arguably.
Yeah.
What a really interesting way to incorporate that.
I suppose what it is with Rocketman as it's used in the film is they catch the emotional truth of the song. Again, there is a very bad jukebox musical you could make out of Elton John's hits where this is literally a song about someone going into space or something.
Yeah.
But they zero in on the fact that what makes this song last and why it connects with people is that sense of real loneliness at the core of it.
Which I suppose, is homage to where these songs came from. They were, he had a style of very personal, deep songs between himself and Bernie. They created songs that were really deep in emotion, and every line had a meaning. There was never you never listen to one line and it just a flippant line because it rhymed or because of this. Everything had a meaning. It was centered around something.
And what I love in particular about Bernie Taupin's songwriting is that there isn't really a line between the fantasy and the emotion of it, which I suppose is a reason why he was so well matched to a showman like Elton, because when we first see him in this movie, and I'm sure this is a pretty accurate portrayal of who Bernie Taupin was at this point in his life, he is a kid living in his mother's bedroom in Lancashire writing about cowboys. You don't think you don't think that guy could probably get dressed on a morning, but you don't really think that he's going to write songs that make people cry at weddings. But somewhere in the fantasy of it, there is something very real.
It has a reality grounding of which then he takes to a fantasy level, I think. It's just so many of the lyrics, and what actually, it really interestingly enough, again going back to the film and the way it shows sometimes when it slows down the lyrics, Yellow Brick Road, for example, when they are talking about that and Bernie's working out of the restaurant. And almost the words are spoken. They took on a new meaning for me. I'd listened to that song a million times before, but slowing it down with the dialect, what's just happened in the film, and then almost talking / singing the words. I was thinking I'd never noticed that line said that. So it took on a different meaning for me, which I really liked because it was something new. Reinventing something that's been around for ages.
For me, the great example of that in the film is the very early number with I Want Love.
Yes.
Where it's passed in between members of his family, and suddenly a song which, in its recorded state, is just a song about heartbreak, a song about one man's heartbreak, suddenly becomes about all these different people and everything they wanted from life and everything they didn't get from life. And it's a really great sequence, I think.
And again, I couldn't agree more with you. And again, by the end of that song, by the end of that 2 or 3 minutes, you feel as though you know his family so much more than when
Yeah.
the song started. And you know, that is, I feel as though although it's 2 hours long, what they're able to do in those sequences that we keep referencing is essentially speed up the investment of the viewer
Yeah.
in the film.
And one of the things I love about movies is that compression. I hate that it's fashionable now to make everything like at the very least a mini series and to talk about how it's 10 episodes long, so it's got the storytelling is so much better. And you say, well, that's not better storytelling, isn't it? It's just more storytelling. I think there are moments in a film, particularly a film like this, which is a musical and has license to be kind of non-realistic, where you can just cut things together and have things live alongside each other in a way that really deepens the meaning of them.
Yeah, and all whilst listening to great songs.
Which we should talk about. Yeah, we should talk about our sort of experience of Elton John's music, because we have only sort of talked about it as it appears in this film, I think.
So the first time I came across Elton John, it was really interesting, isn't it? Because if you're not, you know, if you weren't born in that decade, or even the decade that followed, you know, when he's at his peak of his powers, and you're hearing those songs, so for context, I'm born in 1990, so I'm probably listening to his songs for the very first time 2003 to 2004. You know,
oh right, because that's when Are You Ready for Love became a surprise #1, isn't it? That must be when that was happening.
I did actually forget about that. That might be why.
What
and then
did
you
it?
kind of get down, a little bit of a rabbit hole. I really like this song, and so when I was listening to his songs for the first time, what struck me, or what I've always enjoyed about music, is those unique artists that you could play anywhere around the world, and you put the song on, and immediately you know who it is.
Yeah.
I'd put Elton John into that category, and I don't think it's a very big group of people that actually can be in that category. But he for me is in that.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, it was more of a sort of an odd journey, because, and I suppose it does tie in like that to how Elton John was seen in the wide world. I do remember hearing "I'm Still Standing" when I was a kid. I think there was. My memory of it is, and I'm not sure whether this is just something I've like hashed together in my mind to make sense of this, but my memory of it is that there was a special, now that's what I call music compilation, which was like the best of the first 10 albums or whatever. And the TV campaign for it went mad on "I'm Still Standing." You know, that was considered one of the absolute crown jewels of the set. And I understood that, because I as soon as I heard it, I loved that song. And I grew apart from him a bit after, I guess, because like when I was in my teens, you had Candle in the Wind 97 out, which one was a record everyone quickly got bored of hearing, and two, it just made him feel like part of the establishment in a way that I didn't want to be listening to anyone who was part of the establishment at that age. I don't think, you know, a teenager would. No. So I suppose I came back round slowly. I think what might have done it was a few years after that, I started to get into the Beastie Boys, and they did a cover version of Benny and the Jets with Biz Markie, which is alcohol may have been imbibed at some point during the recording, but it did send me back to the early records, most of which I had not heard beyond, you know, Your Song or any of the other sort of one or two big hits that come from them. And I became fascinated by how very, very good they are.
Yeah, absolutely, and similar to yourself, you know, my teens was filled with, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Linkin Park, Blink 182, all those type of things. And actually, as you was talking, then it sparked a memory, and I think the first song was Pinball Wizard.
Oh yeah,
A real, because so many people have covered Pinball Wizard, and so I came across his cover of Pinball Wizard, absolutely loved it. And then like you say there, you've got your song and the usuals that everyone would have heard, if not, for myself, associating it to Elton John, who, the superstar. But then that kind of prompted me to, I think, to start listening a little bit more. And then probably as I got into my 20s, or where I would also say my appreciation of music increased, and the range of music that I listened to increased. It was at that point then really I'm starting to listen to some of his albums and some of the lesser known titles.
Yeah, I think that sort of point about the range of music was probably part of what did it with me as well, because like, I suppose not dissimilar to you, when I was a teenager, I mainly liked punk. I was very into punk, and I think if I had encountered a lot of those early Elton John songs back then, I probably wouldn't have appreciated them much, because I would have found them kind of florid and kind of too gentle, and I wouldn't have understood how good they were.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have listened to it, and I suppose as well. Then I probably listened to music and didn't understand why I liked some music and why I didn't like other music, and why even music that you maybe don't fully like, you can still appreciate the influences that have gone into that music. And on that point with Elton John, I think he has such a unique sound. A unique blend of, I feel, that rock and roll, but also that soul as well, and
which is explored quite well in the film, isn't it? That there is such, for all that it's very easy to listen to Elton John music and think, what is the genre of this? Oh, it's Elton John. He's a genre to himself, but there were elements in his music, and particularly in those early records, of soul, of glam rock, of country and western, of an awful lot of things that seem to get smoothed over in terms of being part of just this star persona, which on one level, I guess, is a triumph of his star persona. They can absorb him doing any kind of music he wants, but it does, I think, make people overlook how interesting the early records are.
Yeah. And do you know what I noticed the other day as well? I was listening to some of his songs. A lot of slow songs, and what you'd call maybe ballads. And I'd be interested to know if there's been another male artist that has had as much success with those slower ballad-like songs as he has, because immediately when you think rock and roll in the 70s, you think upbeat, his Rocketman, his Crocodile Rock, I'm Still Standing. But a lot of his other stuff are real slow, meaningful, deep, emotional songs, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think that's true. I can't really think of one. I suppose you would have to, as you say, go to soul singers and start thinking about people like Sam Cooke or Otis Redding for another male artist who has that kind of vulnerability as part of their USP.
Yeah, and for him to be doing it in the decades that he was doing it in, those ultra, again going back to Queen and the kind of music that they were doing, all upbeat, real rocker type songs. He was bucking this trend and still being successful in doing that as well.
Yeah, and I think part of it is like what the film contextualizes very well. Part of it is kind of a British post-war thing where we've just gone through World War II. It was brutally tough. We had a rationing regime that lasted well into the 1950s. And suddenly there is this space for people from ordinary, boring, working class suburbs to dream big and want to be, in Elton's case, a ballady, in Freddie Mercury's case, the biggest star in the world, in David Bowie's case, a Martian. Suddenly you're licensed to do this in a way that you weren't before.
Yeah. I know, what a burst of creativity around that time as well.
Yeah.
To produce such talent. And again, going back to the films for Elton John, I found that quite interesting. How he came to play the piano, how
Yeah.
it portrayed him to have a natural gift, sat in front of a piano for the very first time and being able to go through the keys as he did, then having that kind of classical upbringing and training and schooling.
Yeah. And I mean, some of that stuff at the start with him learning piano felt like a screenwriter's invention when I first watched it, but I have since read his autobiography, and it literally was the case that if you played him a classical piece on the radio, he could play it up until the point where you turned the radio off. He had that gift.
And, you liken that kind of gift to, composers.
Yeah.
People in, and he kind of took that out. Yeah, exactly. You more often than not, if you heard something like that, you would be thinking, oh, they're a classical music player. He took that and managed to become the biggest rock star on the earth.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, isn't it, where I think bad 70s rock is the kind of rock that you listen to and you think, oh yeah, I can hear everyone's a good player, but do a tune. Whereas when you listen to Crocodile Rock, you don't necessarily think this person has learned at the Royal Academy. It just sounds like a big thumping kind of piano boogie thing. You can take it apart and you find that there's lots of fascinating stuff going on, but it doesn't hamper the song's immediacy.
No. And I, as you mentioned that, and when you were saying about taking it apart, and you can see that a lot's going on. Again, another thing I found fascinating was the honesty in which in the film he says, I can't write songs.
Yeah.
I can't do that. I can't, I can do this. I just can't do that.
Again, man, the autobiography is wonderfully.
Is it?
I mean, firstly, I want to say that I only read it because I was going on this podcast and I was staggered. I think it's the funniest book I've read since Inherent Vice. I think it's absolutely brilliant. But he talks for a long time about the stuff which I think is rightly cut out from this film, which is his time in the trenches. This time when, music producers thought, well, we've got this kid who, doesn't look like a pop star, but he can play piano, but he can't write lyrics. Okay, well, we've got this kid who can't sing, but he's a lyricist. And the natural thing to get them to do together is to get them writing songs for Cilla Black or Tom Jones or someone. And he is like really frank about the fact that him and Bernie just failed at doing that for about 3 solid years.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd love to have seen some of the stuff they sent over to Tom Jones.
One thing that I had heard that he'd done but I'd forgotten about it until I read the book was that I can't remember why this happened. I remember this was something that my dad had, but they used to do these vinyl albums which had like chart hits of the day but performed by session musicians, and there was some complex rights related reason why they couldn't do what they later did and just put the songs recorded by the artists who had hits with them. But Elton John for a while was part of that factory where they just had to like cover anything that was in the charts. And he said there were times when people were coming to me and saying, all right, can you do us a version of Young, Gifted and Black? And he said, well, it kind of loses some of its force coming from a white bloke from Pinner, but yeah, I'll give it a go, I guess.
The image of that would
surprisingly he's never pulled that out as a concert. I can't imagine why.
I can't for the life of me think why that wouldn't be a good idea. Just an absolute genius. Just the way, and I can I didn't know that the 3 years prior, trying to do music for other people. But I can immediately go, yeah, I understand that. I can understand why it wouldn't work, because it apart from your song, I would say that a large amount of his music immediately sounds a lot worse from anybody else, no matter who it is, than when Elton John did it, because there was just something about the lyrics and the uniqueness of the surrounding parts. And what I mean by that is, I suppose, the melody that he put to the words, and his stagemanship that he puts into that. And so no matter who does that, I think it just loses something.
Yeah, and maybe I hadn't thought of this before, but maybe this is why, although, as you say, Elton John songs do not generally work when covered, he has a surprisingly high number of songs that have sampled his work. It's that strange sort of afterlife that a lot of those songs have with I forget which song it was, but there's an Elton John sample on Ghetto Gospel by Tupac.
Yes.
There's a really fantastic Tribe Called Quest song that samples Benny and the Jets.
Right.
There's an unexpectedly rich Elton John hip hop discography out there, and maybe that is why these are great songs. You can take them apart and they still work, but what you can't do is cover them.
Yeah, I would think that's right. Like I say, I the only one I can think of is your song,
which is like a standard, isn't it?
Yeah, which has probably been covered by, it's the safe option for artists to try and cover. You try and cover, as you mentioned earlier, Daniel, Crocodile Rock, Rocketman.
I've heard some bad versions of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. For some reason, that is the song that people flunk more than any other.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
It kind of teases artists in. This will be an easy one to do, and then just chews them up and spits them out.
Everyone loves Goodbye Yellow Brick Road until about 3 minutes later.
Not anymore.
Yes. Before we finish, there's just a few other people in the cast that I want to single out, because I do think, although it is Egerton's show, it is a pretty rich supporting bench. I think Bryce Dallas Howard as his mother is fantastic. That is a really unheralded performance, I think.
But brilliant. It's only through her performance that I think you are able to join the dots between how Elton is and why that is. But not and also worth mentioning, not just the bad points as well, as in the feeling unloved and abandonmentship and all those type of things, but also just the extra nature is how I'm going to describe it. His mum's doing that at the very beginning of the show, and he's doing that by the end of it.
Yeah, because I mean, she in her own way is also sort of trying to seize the freedoms that are opening up in the second half of the 20th century, and it just so happens that that's in, I don't want to say a more destructive way, because Elton's pretty self-destructive, but there isn't the sort of saving grace of the talent there. But I think Bryce Dallas Howard is really good, and I want to give her props as one of the perilously small number of American actors who can do a British accent that isn't just, posh, that isn't just Downton Abbey. No other American actor can nail that as well as she does, I think.
It's again, a really good point. I don't think I have. The posh is easy, isn't it? Because it doesn't have any earth grit to it.
I think I think people are familiar with it. People grow up watching it on television. It's like the obvious thing that foreigners know about Britain, and you watch enough of it and you can do an impersonation. But getting someone from California to do a Pinner accent is a bit of a taller order.
Nailed it though.
Yeah. So I think she's very good. I do have a great fondness for Jamie Bell as well in anything really, but as Bernie Taupin in this case.
Another star of the show, really. I don't think it would have been the same if there was an actor that wasn't as strong.
Yeah.
It could have brought the film down a little bit, but to have two people in those iconic roles do the job that they did, I think it was really fantastic.
And I was worried that it was going, when I saw it on paper, that it was going to feel like a bit of a nudge in the ribs, because of course this is written by Lee Hall, who wrote Billy Elliot, and Elton John did the music for the stage play of Billy Elliot. And I thought, am I going to be able to forget about that? And yeah, after about sort of 30 seconds, I forgot it was Jamie Bell. So, mission accomplished.
It's the long hair.
It's the long hair is very young Billy Elliot, it must be said. Yeah. So yeah, very fond of that. Yeah, people underestimate how versatile Jamie Bell is, but he's had a weird bloody career in a good way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he has managed to make sure that he doesn't get typecasted. I think that such a huge role. Immediately, you can probably struggle to step out of the shadow of that. And so I think he's taken some of the stuff I've seen him in. He's really taken on different types of roles. You're almost having to go to the opposite. And show his skill set, I think.
There can't be many other actors who have been directed by Clint Eastwood and Lars von Trier. I think that's probably kind of a unique corner of film that he's carved himself out there. Yeah.
Yeah, something to put on the CV, certainly. But yeah, it was in danger of being typecasted, wasn't?
I'm
play
sure
that
after
role,
Billy Elliot, he'll have got like 1,000 boy comes of age by doing insert unusual hobby here, and he quite rightly avoided all of it.
Yeah, had a little bit of a break. And when he has come back, I think he's picked the right roles.
Yeah.
Although interestingly enough, I feel always supporting roles as opposed to
true.
lead.
Yeah. And I don't know whether that's just part of how he's avoided that typecasting, that he's thought, one way that I won't be asked to play that self-discovery story again is if I am supporting the person who's discovering themselves. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to devalue his input. I think there's been many of films that have been propped up by the supporting cast.
Completely.
And again in this, I think he certainly adds to and is a reason why it's such a great film.
Yeah. There's not a great amount of Elton John cinematic history there has to interpolate. Like, I always say the reason why no one's made a film about like the Beatles' rise to success is because A Hard Day's Night already exists. So what can you add to it? But there is a fantastic Elton John cinema connection that I found out when I was doing the research for this, which I think we could end on now. The original studio version of Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word has electric piano by James Newton Howard, who would go on to do the score for Pretty Woman, The Dark Knight, and many, many other films.
Wow, I didn't know about that.
No.
That's a bit of a nugget of information there.
When pubs reopen, this is the kind of trivia that we're going to need.
Do you know, I might actually start a book that just lists this. I could easily get material for the next 2 or 3 years, I think. And this would be down there. I'd maybe wait a few months, so I don't peak too soon. But I certainly
but stockpile it. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yes, until next week then, that's your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
And I've been Ben.
And we'll see you next week.